Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating piece of source material. We're going to unpack a highly polarized broadcast segment from political commentator Laura Ingraham. Now, right off the bat, I want to be clear. Our goal today is not to debate the politics, take a side, or tell you what to think. Not at all. Instead, we're going to neutrally break down the exact language used in this segment to uncover its underlying rhetorical structure. Political monologues are these incredibly, carefully crafted pieces of persuasion. By analyzing the tactics on these slides, we're going to see exactly how a broadcaster builds a compelling, high-stakes narrative designed to mobilize a viewership.
Because the source material is a fast-paced monologue jumping all over the place, we're going to use this thematic roadmap to logically organize the arguments. We'll look at 1. Framing the midterm threat. 2. Immigration and law enforcement. 3. Cultural and social flashpoints. 4. Unmasking moderate candidates. And 5. The final call to action. Let's jump right in.
Okay, let's dive into this first section, framing the midterm threat.
Look, if you want to mobilize an audience, you've got to set the stakes absolutely sky high right out of the gate. And the host here doesn't frame the upcoming election as just some simple policy disagreement. Notice her exact wording. She calls it a complete and total takeover of America. She explicitly claims that Democrats aren't just dabbling in Marxism and socialism anymore, but fully out-and-out embracing it. This kind of language instantly transforms a standard midterm election into a literal existential threat for the viewer.
And to make that existential threat feel real, she immediately anchors it to 3 core fears. The broadcast claims a Democratic majority will guarantee mass amnesty, a society where criminals are totally coddled, and a world where law enforcement itself becomes the target. By establishing these 3 pillars of chaos, she basically sets the perfect stage for the specific, real-world examples she's about to rapid-fire at the audience.
Moving right along to Section 2, Immigration and Law Enforcement.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the host rapidly jumps geographically to build her case. To prove that this threat to law enforcement is a nationwide epidemic, she points to Abdul El Sayed in Michigan, highlighting his, quote, calling ICE agents government thugs. Then, almost in the same breath, she seamlessly pivots over to a politician in Connecticut arguing for state sovereignty against federal ICE enforcement. By linking these geographically distant examples together, the monologue paints a picture of a highly coordinated, widespread anti-ICE sentiment. Next, the broadcast draws a super stark contrast between 2 competing narratives, specifically citing the Laken Riley Act. On one side, you have the host's framing. ICE protects innocent citizens from visceral, real-world threats like sex traffickers and drug smugglers. On the other side, she presents the opposing view, which claims ICE possesses unchecked power to terrorize communities. The host openly mocks this opposing view. She actually characterizes the left's stance as liberal performance art, where masked ICE agents are treated like imaginary boogeymen. All right, that brings us to Section 3, Cultural and Social Flashpoints.
Here, the monologue shifts away from borders and into deep cultural divides. The host plays these audio clips of activists pledging to fight fascism and defeat the oligarchy. But she doesn't just let the clips play. She actively mocks them, comparing their rhetoric to a bad college sit-in, which totally diminishes their seriousness. And then she attacks the core logic, pointing out the hypocrisy of fighting an oligarchy when the Democratic Party gets massive financial support from wealthy tech billionaires. It's a really fascinating rhetorical 2-step. First, minimize the opponent, then expose a perceived hypocrisy.
Wow, this one just brilliantly illustrates the sheer rhetorical divide in modern political media. Notice the contrast here. You have a New Jersey candidate, Tina Shaw, stating a fairly straightforward policy stance. Healthcare is a human right, and that includes transgender surgery. The host counters this not with a dry policy debate, but with extreme visceral language. She calls supporters medical mutilators and describes the practice as barbarism, forced on kids who can't consent. The contrast in tone instantly turns a healthcare policy debate into a high-stakes moral emergency.
This segment then uses a tactic we can basically call controversy saturation. The host targets Graham Plotner, a candidate challenging Maine's moderate Republican Susan Collins, and just lists a rapid succession of his past controversies. A desire to shut the government down, an apology for a Nazi chest tattoo, past comments blaming date rape victims, and reports of praising Hamas tactics on Reddit. By stacking these extreme examples back to back, the host leaves the viewer completely overwhelmed, making the candidate appear totally radioactive.
And after listing all those massive controversies, the host delivers this conclusive blow. She claims the opposing party will happily excuse any radical behavior from their candidates, no matter how extreme, as long as it gets them a seat at the table. She flat out labels Democrats as political mercenaries who prioritize raw power over any moral principle. This effectively tells the viewer, hey, the opposition literally cannot be trusted. Their underlying motives are fundamentally corrupt.
Let's move on to Section 4, Unmasking Moderate Candidates.
Let's move to and see how this builds with Abigail Spanberger's Virginia governor run. The broadcast argues that while Spanberger is sold to voters as a sensible, cross-party, moderate hope, her actual agenda is anything but. The host claims that the so-called moderate is really a socialist who is anti-growth, anti-ICE, and eager to slap new taxes on everyday things like streaming services and gym memberships. The rhetorical message is crystal clear. There is no such thing as a safe, moderate Democrat. They are all hiding a radical agenda.
Finally, we hit Section 5, the final call to action. So the crucial point is how the host structures this final choice. It's a completely stark contrast between order and chaos. On one side, she presents this idealized vision of the past Trump administration: closed borders, eradicated waste, a booming economy. On the other side, she offers a terrifying prediction for the future under a Democrat majority, using heavy alliteration for impact. 2 years of recriminations, regression, and revenge. The choice presented to the audience isn't subtle at all. It's a literal choice between salvation and destruction.
The monologue closes out with a massive rallying cry. The host urges her viewers to reject what she calls the mainstream media's demoralization campaign. She tells her audience that they're smart, that they're not stupid, and that they need to see right through these manufactured fake problems to focus on the real threats she just spent the whole segment outlining. It's an incredibly empowering note that validates the viewer's intelligence while simultaneously isolating them from outside information sources.
Well, that brings us to the end of our breakdown. When we step back and really look at the whole architecture of a segment like this, the emotional pacing, the hand-picked quotes, the stark contrasts, and the existential framing, we really have to ask ourselves, how do media narratives and rhetorical framing shape our understanding of high-stakes elections? It's a vital question to keep in mind no matter what side of the aisle you're on the next time you tune in to a political broadcast. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep thinking critically.